They didn't just reject the care package. I can handle rejection, I've worn it like armor before. What I wasn't ready for was the laughter. The way my mom wrinkled her nose and tossed the box back like it was a garbage bag. What are we supposed to do with this cheap army junk? She snapped, my sister? Oh, she chuckled and added, maybe next time, just send a card, or nothing. But it wasn't just what they said. It was the silence that followed. The message between the lines. That I didn't belong. Not in their polished little world of designer handbags and airbrushed family portraits. I stood there in uniform, the same one I'd worn while dragging bleeding bodies out of blown-up shelters, and they looked at me like I was the embarrassment. That box had socks. Protein bars. A hand-sewn scarf for my nephew. Things I'd carried through border checks and sandstorms. Things that meant I remembered them, even when I couldn't sleep a single night in a foreign country far from home, but they didn't see that. They saw a box from a daughter who didn't make it. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I picked up the box, walked out the door, and never looked back. That night, while they poured wine and talked about vacation homes, someone on the other side of the world read the field report I submitted, one that saved an entire platoon from walking into a minefield. The cheap army junk they mocked? It's now standard issue protocol on 3 military bases. And the woman they turned their backs on? The Pentagon knows my name now. Hey, before I get into the rest of this story, can you drop a hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're watching from? It means the world to me. Helps me feel a little less alone out here, and if this story hits you in the chest even just a little, maybe hit that subscribe button. Every follow reminds me that truth still matters, okay? Now let me take you back to where this story really begins. The sun in Herat, Afghanistan doesn't rise. It burns. The wind carries dust like it remembers every war fought on that land. Even the supply tent felt like it might go up in flames. I was sweating through my uniform shirt. Clipboard in hand, checking medical crates and ration boxes. Water filters. Bandages. The basics. My boots felt like they were melting into the ground. Then this young Afghan private, barely 20, walked up to me with a small cloth bundle. I knew what it was before I even opened it. Inside was a delicate, hand-embroidered handkerchief. Light blue thread curled across the white cotton like waves. I had it made weeks earlier during a rare lull in our rotation. I slipped it into a velvet box I kept in my footlocker, along with a brass insignia etched with my mom's name, Eileen. I added a folded letter too. Neat, blocky handwriting. Years of field reports will do that to you, but soft words I hadn't said out loud in years. It was a birthday gift. My mom was turning 60. I couldn't be there, but I wanted her to know I still saw her, but I didn't expect what happened next. Just before sunset, my CO pulled me aside. You've been granted 5 days emergency leave, he said. No warning. No paperwork screw-up. Just green light. A military flight was heading back to the States. No one knew why it was happening, but it felt like the universe had finally handed me a moment of grace. I boarded the C-17, holding that gift box in my lap the entire flight. Imagining her smile. My sister Brianna teasing me for being all mushy. My dad giving that silent nod of approval, the one he used instead of words, when we landed at Dallas Love Field. I scanned the crowd. No one was there. Just a single text from my mom, keys under the mat. Come straight home. That was it. After 2 years overseas and 12 in the army, I stood outside baggage claim, pretending to scroll my phone, trying to keep my heart from falling out of my chest. The house smelled the same, lemon cleaner, pot roast, those vanilla candles my mom always lit. But it was colder somehow. We sat at the dinner table in the exact same spots as always. Brianna still wore her white coat from the hospital. She looked flawless, smug as ever. I placed the box by Mom's plate. She didn't say anything. Brianna opened it, scoffed, and said, "Seriously? Junk from the battlefield?" She dropped the scarf on the floor. It's a birthday, Jess. Not a memorial. I froze. Mom just sighed. Is that really all, Jessica? Dad added without lifting his eyes, you could have done something more meaningful. Maybe followed Brianna's path. The army's not exactly a future for women. I didn't shout. Didn't cry. I just stared at that scarf on the floor, now stained with a boot print, 12 years of sacrifice. Of carrying wounded soldiers, folding flags for other people's children. And that's what I came back to. Not outrage. Just emptiness. I stood up. Grabbed my bag. Whispered, I won't bother you again. Nobody stopped me. Not even my mom. The door clicked shut behind me like the safety off a weapon. As the plane lifted me back into the dark sky hours later, I stared out at the fading lights of Dallas and whispered to myself, maybe the battlefield was gentler than whatever this was supposed to be. Returning to Idaho felt less like going back to base and more like walking into exile. The military transit station they assigned me to wasn't even a real base, just a scattered mess of metal buildings, tucked along the northern border, surrounded by frozen pines and a wind that screamed through the cracks like it had something to prove. There were no familiar faces left. Everyone from my old unit had either been rotated out after Operation Iron Wind or reassigned to posts far from mine. It was just me now, and a warehouse full of ammunition pallets and combat rations. I spent my days cataloging inventory. My nights? Cataloging silence. No one asked about Dallas. Maybe they assumed it went well. Or maybe they didn't care. Either way, I kept to myself. Every morning I ran until my legs burned. Every night I worked until my hands cramped. Pain was predictable. Paperwork never threw your heart on the floor and called it worthless. Then, one night, a sealed envelope changed everything. It was handed to me by my commanding officer without a word. No smile. No small talk. Just an official look and a quick nod. Inside, Operation Iron Veil. Effective immediately. No explanation. Just coordinates and departure instructions. Civilian Evacuation Logistics Advisor. Classification level, red. I read the orders 4 times in the dark of my bunk while the electric heater buzzed faintly in the corner. The name scratched at something in my memory, like a nightmare you half remember from childhood, wearing a different face. 2 days later, I arrived at an undisclosed location. The air buzzed with tension. People talked in code, never completing their sentences, always looking over their shoulders. I expected strangers. Cold briefings. A wall of formal silence, but there he was, Dylan Monroe, my cousin. Not exactly close, not exactly distant either. When I was a rookie cadet, he was the only one in the family who used to send letters. They were awkward, typed, full of dry jokes about MREs and push-ups, but they mattered. He mattered. Until he vanished. Now here he was, wearing a regulation gray blazer instead of fatigues, standing by a touchscreen map like he belonged in a war room instead of a reunion. His eyes met mine for just a second. Then he looked away. The meeting was vague. Buzzwords. Evacuation corridors. Threat mitigation. Undisclosed civilian entities. It sounded like humanitarian work. But it felt colder. Like something strategic wearing a smile. After the meeting, I caught Dylan in the corridor, just the two of us between rows of humming servers and sealed crates. He didn't smile. Didn't ask how I was. He leaned in and whispered, Jess. This isn't what you think. There are layers. And your family? They're more tangled in this than you know. He walked off before I could ask what that meant. I just stood there, boots glued to the linoleum floor, as questions started wrapping around my chest like wire. What layers? What was my family's role in this? And why was I really brought back? My reassignment hadn't been a coincidence. My trip home hadn't just been bad timing. Someone had pulled me back into this storm, someone with a reason. I just hadn't figured out who yet. We landed at dawn on the scorched edge of what used to be Marrow Creek, a small Arizona town near the border that now looked like it had been punched by God. The wildfires had passed weeks ago, but the smoke lingered. Thick. Bitter. And the ground still felt hot in places. The air smelled wrong. Copper, plastic, and something sharper, chemical. That's when we got the full briefing. A chemical waste facility nearby had ruptured during the fires. Toxins spilled into the groundwater, into the air. Into people's lungs, most of the residents? Undocumented. Veterans. Elderly. Forgotten, this wasn't a mission. This was triage, our orders: evacuate the corridor. Secure as many as we could. Risk? Irrelevant. I stopped counting the dead after day 2. But I never stopped counting the ones we got out. A young mom with a baby girl, her face covered in blisters. An older man with no legs who refused to leave until every neighbor was found. Grandparents clinging to my sleeves like I was the last rope out of hell. And through every ash-choked step, I remembered why I wore the uniform. This wasn't about orders. This wasn't about medals. This was about protecting people no one else would. But there was one moment that carved itself into my bones. We found a trailer half-collapsed near the eastern line. Inside, a girl, no older than 7, was pinned beneath debris, her voice a tiny cry under splintered wood and sagging wires. I didn't think. I ripped off my vest, crawled in, cut through the wreckage with shaking hands. The roof groaned, threatening to bury us both, but I got her. I hauled her onto my back. Flames snapped behind us like teeth. I didn't stop. The last thing I remember is breaking through the smoke line and hearing her whisper in my ear, "Don't let go." I didn't know we'd been filmed. A drone captured the entire thing. From the moment I pulled her out to the second we collapsed at the convoy line, the footage leaked. Went viral. Suddenly, I wasn't just a soldier. I was Captain Phoenix, reborn. Brave. Heroic. The face of hope. They didn't see the tremor in my hands when I tried to sleep. They didn't feel the ache in my lungs. Still raw from inhaling flame, they didn't know that girl wasn't just a life I saved, she was an order I disobeyed, because someone, somewhere, had decided she wasn't supposed to make it out. A week later, I stood at the Pentagon, full dress blues. Metal pinned to my chest. Cameras flashing like fireworks, they announced my name like I'd always belonged there, like the sacrifice they'd never seen was something to be proud of. But the silence that followed? That was louder than anything. In the front row sat my parents, and Brianna, all dressed like they were extras in a presidential campaign ad. My mom wore her pearl necklace, the one she only took out for Easter. My dad kept adjusting his tie. Smiling like every clap in the room was for him, and Brianna? She dabbed her eyes with a tissue and whispered to whoever sat next to her, "That's my sister. The one from the video." I didn't look at them. Not directly, I stared above their heads. Over the generals. Past the flags. Because their smiles felt too perfect. Too rehearsed, like they had skipped the hard part and showed up for the victory lap. As I walked off stage, Brianna caught me in the hallway. She hugged me. Hard. Like we were kids again. Her voice cracked in my ear. "I know about the base, Jess," she whispered. "About the files. I didn't tell anyone. But Ethan. He's not who you think he is." Her words hit me like a cold knife to the spine. I wanted to believe it was just emotion talking. That maybe guilt had finally cracked through her polished armor, but when I pulled away and looked in her eyes, what I saw wasn't just regret, it was fear, and that's when I knew, whatever I'd just walked away from on that stage wasn't the ending, it was the beginning. They gave me a temporary room at Fort Belvoir for rest and recovery. The walls were beige. The lights buzzed. The bed was stiff enough to double as a table. I wasn't resting. Not really. Between the press requests, interviews, and daily check-ins, I was being paraded around like a mascot. A poster girl for good PR, then one of the major networks called. They wanted me on live TV. National broadcast. Primetime slot, Captain Monroe, the anchor smiled across the table, tilting her head just so. You've inspired so many. Do you have a message for your family? They were at your ceremony, after all. I looked straight into the camera. Took a breath. Family, I said with a smile that wasn't quite a smile, is a concept I'm still learning to define. They laughed. Thought it was a joke. It wasn't. The next day, my mom showed up, just walked into my quarters like it was her kitchen. She carried a woven basket, apples, crackers, and imported chocolate, like this was a Hallmark movie and we were supposed to hug under soft lighting. Your father's at a fundraiser, she said casually, placing the basket on the counter. But I told the ladies at the club about your medal. They were so impressed. That was it, no apology. No, I'm proud of you. No mention of the birthday scarf crushed on the kitchen floor or the dinner table humiliation. She was there to collect credit, not give it. I nodded. Said nothing, let her talk. Let her pose. Then she reached into her purse, maybe for a tissue, maybe her lipstick, and something small fell out. It slid under the table, a key. I bent to pick it up. Looked at it, a plain brass key. But edged with a code I'd only seen once before, Alpha 12 Gamma, not a house key. This was a military archive key. Highly restricted. Each one tracked. Each one tied to an intelligence vault. Where did you get this? I asked, suddenly cold. She blinked. Just for a second. Then laughed it off. Oh, your uncle was in procurement ages ago. Probably just a souvenir. But the way she snatched it back, too fast, too practiced, I didn't press further. Not yet, but the warning drum in my chest. It didn't stop pounding for hours. Why did my mother have a key tied to high-clearance archives? Why had she only shown up after the news cameras did? What was she hiding behind that perfect, brittle smile? When she left, she hugged me. Too tight. Too long. Like she was claiming ownership. I didn't hug back. And when the door closed behind her, I stood frozen, staring at the place where that key had landed. She had brought fruit, she had brought congratulations, and she had brought a question I couldn't ignore anymore. Dylan showed up the next morning, brown paper bag in hand. Full of pastries. That same grin he used to get out of speeding tickets when we were teenagers. Thought you could use something sweet, he said, like nothing had happened, like we hadn't exchanged loaded words in a government hallway a few days ago. Then, as casually as you'd mention the weather, there's a family dinner tonight. Your parents want to reconnect. Come. Every cell in my body said no, but I needed answers. About the key. About him. About the lies threading through my bloodline like poison, so I nodded. Sure, I said, guarded. Let's reconnect. That night, the house in Dallas looked the same, the lawn trimmed. The gate still squeaked, but inside? Something was off, the air was too sweet. Too still, like they'd staged it all. The dining room table gleamed like it had never been used. The food was 5-star perfect. The wine glasses sparkled. Brianna wore a new dress. Flawless makeup. My dad couldn't stop talking about Washington. The calls haven't stopped, he said, beaming. Everyone saw the footage. They all said how proud they were. They weren't mending anything, they were building a narrative. Look at us, their eyes said. We're the perfect patriotic family now. We have a hero. I felt like a prop in a museum. Then Dylan leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand. There's an opening at one of the private defense consultancies, he said, voice smooth. Our family's got friends there. You'd be perfect. I stiffened. I'm not leaving the military. He chuckled, cold. It's not about what you want, Jess. Some things you don't get to walk away from. You still owe this family a chance to show itself. That was it, the real tone. The real game. His smile had thorns in it. After dinner, while they laughed in the living room, I slipped down the hallway into Dad's study. Still smelled like cigar smoke and old bourbon. I knew where he kept his backups. He was too paranoid not to. In the bottom drawer, beneath paperwork and leather folders, I found it, a folded operations map, Iron Vale, not the public version. The real one, marked up routes, unit placements, civilian zones, and handwritten notes, my mother's handwriting, next to certain town names, check marks, others? Red underlines, on another page, a list of civilian designations. Next to each name, numbers, and at the top? A label that made my blood run cold, recommended exclusions, Class C civilians, in the margin, limit exposure risk. Public panic must be avoided. She'd known. She had known about the leak, she had known about the evacuation, and someone, maybe both of my parents, had helped choose who not to save. I stumbled back from the desk like I'd touched something on fire. The study spun around me. My lungs couldn't find air. They'd known, my family, the ones who toasted my medal, the ones who clapped at my ceremony, had been part of Operation Iron Vale. Not just spectators. Architects. My phone buzzed, unknown number, message, if you keep digging, forget about rejoining the military. HVI 72B, I stared at the screen, HVI. High-value individual, a classification. Not a threat. A warning, they had marked me, I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was a surveillance target, and the people I once trusted to protect me were holding the leash. I didn't wait. I packed everything I could grab in 5 minutes and slipped out through the back door before the fear had time to paralyze me. I headed back to the temporary base in Idaho, cold, quiet, isolated. I thought maybe I could hide. Regroup. Think, but I'd barely unpacked when Brianna called me. Her voice crackled through the secure line, barely above a whisper. Jess, she said. It's Mom. Stage 4. Hospital says. It's bad. My chest didn't tighten from grief, it locked from instinct. Something about the timing felt off. After everything that had just happened? After Ethan's warnings? The key? The map? But I still boarded the next flight to Dallas, not for closure, not for comfort, because sometimes the truth dies with the people who keep it, and Eileen Strickland, my mother, had carried too many secrets for too long. The hospital was dim and quiet, like grief had soaked into the walls. They put her in a private room at the end of the hall. Machines clicked. Oxygen hissed. She looked like a shadow of herself, skin waxy, lips dry, breath shallow, but when she saw me, her eyes twitched. Just a little, somewhere between resignation and regret. We didn't say much. There wasn't much left to say. Then, just before Brianna stepped out for coffee, Mom motioned toward the nightstand. Her hand shook as she handed me a crumpled piece of paper, 6 digits, a code, underneath, old study. Bottom cabinet. Then her voice, barely audible, whispered, "Don't trust Ethan. He owes me the truth." That was the last thing she ever said to me. That night, I returned to the house. Everyone else was asleep. The study looked untouched. I went to the bottom cabinet. Entered the code, click, a hidden panel opened. Inside, a hard drive wrapped in black cloth. A leather notebook. Torn edges. Yellowed pages. What I read changed everything. The notebook held letters. Emails. Communications between my mother and a retired general named Marshall Grady. Only he wasn't just retired, he was now CEO of the same private defense firm Ethan worked for. The documents detailed military campaigns, cover-ups, and media management strategies. It wasn't just Iron Vale. There were other missions, all manipulated, all buried. Then came the dagger. An authorization memo. Digital signature, Dylan Monroe. It ordered the removal of a civilian convoy from the evac grid. Rationale: clear corridor for classified cargo transport. The exact path I'd carried that little girl through, the one they planned to leave behind, the one they wrote off, until I disobeyed the order. My cousin signed her death, and I was the one who broke protocol to save her. I dropped the notebook, shaking. The walls of that room felt like they were closing in. How far did this go? How many hands in my family had blood on them? That's when I heard it, keys in the front door. I froze. It wasn't Dylan, it was Brianna. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her makeup smudged. Her breath short. He's watching me too, she said before I even asked. Ethan told me to delete everything. Said it was for national security. I didn't. She pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket. This has the original lists. Names. Orders. Everything. I've had it for months. I didn't know who to trust. But now. We stared at each other. Two sisters who hadn't been on the same side of anything since middle school, but now, we saw the truth. The enemy was inside the house, and maybe he always had been. I did what every soldier trained in survival would do. I infiltrated. I accepted Ethan's job offer, smiled. Nodded. Played the part. He thought I was broken. That the metal, the pressure, the loneliness had brought me back into the fold. He didn't know I was walking straight into the lion's den, with a lit match in my pocket. Before I left Dallas, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Harlan. He owed me his life. Back in Syria, I dragged his bleeding body out of a collapsing building under mortar fire. More importantly, he still had a spine. Within 24 hours, he confirmed everything. Ethan's firm had its claws in at least 6 defense contracts. They were using shell companies, moving weapons, silencing whistleblowers, and erasing civilian casualties from history. It wasn't corruption. It was cancer. The following week, Ethan invited me to strategic onboarding at their Dallas headquarters. The building was all glass, polished concrete, and false smiles. In a conference room with a skyline view, he handed me a contract, sleek, bound in leather, written in lawyer speak and empty promises. Sign here, he said with a smile that felt like poison, and you'll never be watched again. In fact, you'll be the one giving orders. I smiled back, and signed, but the document he saw was a fake, a digitally marked copy created by Harlan's team. The second it was uploaded to their system, it triggered a trace. Every file, every camera feed, every email, redirected to a hidden army server. I excused myself, walked calmly to the lounge, opened my encrypted laptop, typed in 2 codes, and hit upload. Everything, every piece of evidence from the study, from Brianna, from their internal servers, sent to the U.S. Army Command and the Office of the Inspector General. By morning, it all blew open. Warrants, raids, subpoenas. Ethan Monroe was taken into custody, so were 2 retired generals. On the surface, it was a bloodless purge, but behind closed doors, the knives were out. 12 hours later, I got my own letter: temporary suspension, unauthorized dissemination of classified material. Internal review pending. No criminal charges. No public shaming. But also, no reinstatement. They scrubbed my name from headlines. They buried me quietly. The network didn't die. It adapted. This wasn't justice. It was a warning, and I wasn't done. 3 weeks later, I stood at the foot of the granite steps outside the Defense Oversight Committee building in Washington, D.C., full dress blues. No ribbons. No rank. Just the uniform and the spine to wear it. I wasn't there to defend myself, I was there to speak. Inside, the chamber was sealed to the press, but the tension buzzed like static. Outside? Crowds, veterans, civilians, reporters with lenses long enough to reach the moon, and handmade signs that made my throat tighten. We stand with Captain Monroe, across from me, seated like a corporate kingpin flanked by his royal court of lawyers. Ethan, impeccably dressed. Calm. Polished, but I saw it, that flicker, that twitch at the corner of his mouth that said, he was afraid. They called me to testify. I stood. I told them about Iron Veil, about the child who wasn't supposed to make it out, about the files hidden beneath my father's flag, about the silence that passed for patriotism at my family's dinner table. One congressman asked, "Why didn't you just stay quiet? You could have climbed the ranks, made real change." I didn't hesitate, because I didn't join the army to profit off blood. I said. I joined to protect people. Even when the system forgets them. The room went silent, then came the twist. One of Ethan's lawyers stood, dramatic as a soap opera villain. He played a recording, Lieutenant Colonel Harlan's voice, only. It sounded too calm. Too perfect. Mutual benefit. Immunity. Seat at the table. They wanted it to sound like betrayal, a deal behind my back, like Harlan had sold me out. But before the damage could land, another voice cut through the room, from the back gallery. I need to speak. It was Brianna. She walked forward, no longer the doctor in white coats, no longer the golden child. This was the sister who knew the rot inside the walls. I'm not speaking as Jessica's sister, she said. I'm speaking as a former military physician. I worked in their medical supply network. I saw the files. She handed the chair a sealed folder. These are the original records. Payment trails. Civilian casualty orders. Medical supply shortages. Unredacted. Untouched. She pointed to the screen. That recording? It's fake. Deepfake modulated audio. We ran the metadata. It's not real. The room exploded. Lawyers scrambled. Staffers whispered furiously. A recess was called for verification. As Ethan stood to leave, escorted now by armed guards, he stopped just long enough to lean close. You think justice is noble? He sneered. It's leverage, Captain, and you just chose the wrong damn currency. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. His empire was crumbling, and I was the one holding the torch. That night, back in my DC hotel room, I sat by the window. No cameras. No press. Just the city breathing beneath me. The phone rang. It was General Harlan, now retired. You rattled them, he said. Badly. Then came the offer, if you're ready. No rifles this time. Just strategy. Real change. I looked out over the monuments, stone and silence, and I realized something. The hardest wars aren't fought on battlefields. They're fought in boardrooms, in hearings, in conversations where truth is the only weapon and silence is the enemy's favorite tool. 2 weeks after the hearing, I got another call, not from a commander, not from a judge, from a special commission within the Inspector General's office. They were working off the books, outside the media, inside the system. I met them at an unmarked facility near Quantico. No uniforms, no flags, just 4 people, and a question. Will you testify again? This time. Not behind closed doors. On the record. In front of the country. I sat with it. Hard, because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about the girl in the fire, the families who got folded flags instead of answers, the soldiers who served with honor and came home to cover-ups. By dawn, I gave them my answer. I'll testify. But don't introduce me as Captain Monroe. I'm not here as a rank. I'm here as a witness, for the ones who didn't make it out. 1 week later, the cameras rolled, millions watched. I told them everything, about the rot under polished dinner tables, the contracts signed in silence, the ribbons pinned while truth bled out off screen. I didn't stutter, didn't shake, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. 7 months later, the Department of Defense issued their final decision. No court-martial, no reinstatement, no apology. Just a quiet discharge. Security concerns. Elevated risk of compromise. They erased me without a sound. I could have fought back, lit the media on fire, sued for recognition, but I didn't. I packed my bags, rented a truck, and drove west. At the base of the Rockies, I found a stretch of land, built something real, a retreat center, for veterans, for kids from war zones, for people learning how to breathe again. We teach survival, fire building, silence, healing. One quiet evening, Brianna showed up, snow in her hair. A manila folder in her hand. I work for a congressman now, she said softly. He's backing reform. Real reform. And he wants to name it after you. Inside the folder, the Monroe Act, legislation that would protect whistleblowers in military contracts. Bring transparency to civilian strategies. Safeguard the truth before it gets buried again. She looked at me. Would you ever come back to DC? As a policy advisor? Ethics consultant? I shook my head, smiling. I'm still serving. Just not with weapons. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, I stood in the gold light. A group of kids practiced starting fires nearby. A few veterans sat in a circle, quiet. One nodded at me. Another saluted, just with his eyes. No applause, no cameras, but in that silence, I felt seen, and I knew, some wars don't end in surrender, some victories have no crowd, but when you choose integrity over silence, you leave behind a legacy deeper than medals ever could. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and stay with me, because some stories deserve to be remembered.